Hey, it's another installment for a family devotional on the attributes of God during this time of quarantine, isolation, and that sort of thing. Um, and last night we were talking about the unity of God's attributes, and I thought it would be helpful tonight for us to focus in on the cross and how it actually magnifies that in a very important way, which many of us often we don't consider. And so, to help us start thinking about this, I want us to consider the problem that it creates that God forgives us of sin. It's not something we naturally think about, that that's a problem, but from a justice or righteousness standpoint, it's a big problem, and I'll give you an example why. I like to use the story of David and Bathsheba as an example of this. If you're unfamiliar with the story of David and Bathsheba, it can be found in the book of 2 Samuel. And there, David looks out of his window and sees a woman bathing on the roof of her house, and he lusts after her, and he has her come to his palace. He sleeps with her. She becomes pregnant. He then sends for her husband, who is one of his chief soldiers that's at battle, and brings him home and tries to concoct a plan that her husband, his name is Uriah, will sleep with his wife, and then Uriah will think that the baby is his, and everything will be kind of glossed over. But through a sequence of events, Uriah won't go sleep with his wife whenever David brings him back from the front lines. So David has to go to plan B, and that is to arrange for Uriah to die in battle. So at the end of it all, David has committed adultery, and David has committed murder, or at least he's planned for the hit to be taken out on Uriah. Both of these are capital offenses in the Old Testament, worthy of the death penalty. And God confronts David through a prophet named Nathan, and when David repents, God says, "Your sin has been removed from you." Now, consider the problem of this, and let's take it a bit further. Let's imagine that the devil, and this is hypothetical, but not outside of the realm of possibility, who is known as the great accuser of the brethren. He is this being that enters into the heavenly court with accusations against God's people, and would come into God's presence with this David issue in tow, and would say, "See, you're not a righteous God. You're not a just God. You play favorites. David's your boy, and you've just allowed him to get away with murder and adultery." And at that moment, the justice, the righteousness of God is forfeit. It's questioned. Well, Romans chapter 3 addresses just such an issue. Because Romans 3, or Paul writing this, he raises this question and answers it. And he says in verse 21, "But now the righteousness, the justice, the goodness, the equity," those are all words that would apply here, "of God has been manifested apart from the law, although the law and the prophets bear witness to it." So it's been manifested in the real world. It's not just written down in the law. It's manifested in historic events, namely the cross. Skipping on down, verse 23, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified," that is, made right with God, "by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus." And then here is Paul's explanation or defense of God's ability to both forgive, like He did to David, but also remain righteous and just at the same time. Verse 25, "This Jesus, whom God put forward as a propitiation," I'll explain what that word means in a moment, "by His blood, to be received by faith. This was to show God's righteousness, His justice, His equity, because in His divine forbearance, His patience, He had passed over former sins. It was to show His righteousness at the present time, so that He might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus." All right, so Paul is picturing the fact that God, throughout all history, has been passing over sins like David's, and He has not been giving them their full measure of justice. He might show some wrath in certain situations. But the full measure of what sin deserved, God was not showing it. He was exercising forbearance, patience, passing over these things in expectation of something that would have that would make all of these things right. That thing is the cross of Christ, which Paul says is a propitiation. Now, this word captures what is happening that brings God into a state of being able to be both just, as he says there at the end of that passage, and the justifier of sin. I know this is high theology, but I hope you'll hang with me. I like the thought of propitiation, and this video may go a little longer than the others, being like light passing through a lens. You know, light like we see in the atmosphere around us, it's white light. It's made up of the visible spectrum, Roy G. Biv, and these are all various wavelengths of light at various heights and so on, and lengths between them. And depending upon that wavelength is the color that you see. I like to think of God's attributes, his unity, as being like this white light coming straight at us. And therein that is God's love and mercy and grace, those wavelengths, but at the same time there is his wrath and justice, also manifested in God's attributes, character coming straight at us. And at the cross, what happens, like if you take light and pass it through a lens, like a red lens, what happens is that lens catches all of the wavelengths except for one wavelength. If it's a red lens, the blue, the purple, the green wavelengths are captured by that lens. They're absorbed into it, and the only thing that allows through the other side is red. That's how lenses work. Well, Jesus works in the same way. The attributes of God, his wrath, justice, love, and mercy, are passing through Jesus so that us on the other side only receive those positive attributes on our behalf. So God's wrath, justice, love, and mercy, and all various others are coming straight at us. Jesus steps between, and at the cross, God's wrath and justice are absorbed into Jesus, so that the only thing that passes through to you is love, mercy, grace, forgiveness, etc., etc. I mean, what an amazing thing this is. I mean, if this is true, this changes everything, right? And so how does this then change our lives? If we believe this, if we bring this into our lives, how does it change your life? How does this affect you to realize that this is the type of grace that God has shown you?